Claire Curran.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Well, as a member of the Select Committee that did discuss this bill, it was, I suppose you could say, a relatively uncontroversial bill in the Select Committee. There were 4 submissions provided to the Select Committee. There was some changes made in the Select Committee to the bill, most notably that the committee recommended that the bill, that limiting the scope of the levy by clarifying that it was for the Crown to meet the reasonable costs and expenses of compliance with New Zealand's obligation under Article 2 of the International Energy Agency to maintain the emergency reserve commitments that are set out in that article. So that's quite an important amendment that was made. When and there's been some quite good debate so far in the committee stages on this bill, Mr Chair. I do note that there's been a number of questions put forward for the Minister to answer or to clarify, and I've got a few more to put tonight, and it would be useful if they were actually addressed by the Minister during the committee stages of the House. But in the absence of that happening, I will do my best tonight to actually address some of the things that have been raised by other members in the committee stage of this debate. And I note that that the debate has been by the opposition benches and that there hasn't been any participation from the government side so far. But I have gone back and had a look at quite closely at the second reading speech by the Minister, because there wasn't I suppose a relatively important statement made by him, in that he said that the government continues to undertake a range of initiatives to improve the operating environment for the oil and gas sector. And he said that the priorities for the government were to promote energy efficiency measures to help make our fuel use more efficient. Well, this bill doesn't go to that. It deals with ensuring that we have we've got certainty of imported sources of oil and security around that. And unfortunately, though, it doesn't actually address the wider issues of energy security generally in New Zealand and the wider issues of alternative fuel production and where we're going as a nation on that. And those are 2 really glaring gaps. And I would hope that the Minister, given that this is a new year and that it's the beginning of a new term of government, that the Minister would be able to give us some indications of where he is intending to go in this area, and this would be a really good opportunity for that to happen. But I do want to take the House back actually a little bit further than the Select Committee, because the fact that this bill actually exists comes from a process. So you have to dig a little bit into the process to actually find out and dig into the documents to find out the information about this. But there was actually a consultation that went on by the Ministry, by MB, that released a discussion document back in October 2012, and yes, there were 15 submissions, as my colleague Stuart Nash has noted, but you do have to look a bit under the surface to actually find out this information. There were some very interesting submissions given during that process, and it's a real pity that those submitters didn't take their submissions through to the Select Committee process, so that there perhaps could have been a bit more of an in-depth debate around some of those issues. And for the benefit of the New Zealand First Speaker, there were questions raised in that process around whether host countries would actually release ticketed stock to New Zealand during an international supply disruption, so whether or not the oil would actually come, even if there were tickets. And MB noted at the time that the tickets were backed by government-to-government agreements, and a number of them being international treaties. So I suppose there's a reliance on that treaty relationship being fulfilled. Mr. Chair.
Claire Curran.
Thank you. And that the government would only import stock to New Zealand if oil companies in New Zealand were unable to secure their own stock. Now, it was Z Energy that raised that issue during that discussion process. They considered, the MB considered that the most likely scenario following an emergency declared by the IEA would be that the government would release the stock to the foreign company holding it on the government's behalf and thereby fulfilling its obligations. So I suppose there was a trust assumption, and that the Select Committee did ask and was given assurances around that. The Select Committee also asked around whether or not there should be, well, this discussion paper certainly canvassed these issues, as to whether or not there should be more domestic stock holding to cope with supply disruptions. And this issue was also raised during the Select Committee discussion, and MB noted that the New Zealand Institute of Economic Research study said that the discussion document, which it was based on, found that building further domestic stockholding in New Zealand was not an economic way to mitigate the risk of supply disruptions. They said that they were keeping a watching brief on this issue, but they said that it was not economic, essentially, to do it. So those were the answers that were given to us during the Select Committee discussion as well, around whether or not this would be a problem. I just want to raise one more submitter to this discussion process who unfortunately didn't submit to the Select Committee, the Sustainable Energy Forum, that recommended that New Zealand should take steps to reduce its reliance on oil imports and suggested that the longer term issues such as climate change and peak oil should be considered in the analysis of oil security. Unfortunately, when we received the report to the Select Committee on this issue was not part of that discussion. I note, as I said at the beginning, that the government is not did not consider it relevant to raise those issues or give any signals around those things when they brought this bill back to the House. And there is and I would make the point that there is a far more serious issue highlighted which sits behind this bill, which is future energy security for New Zealand. And and I'm very pleased that Sustainable Energy Forum raised this issue back in 2012 during the discussion process, but unfortunately it wasn't considered to be a part of the discussion in the Select Committee. As I said, Labor supports this bill. I note the issues that have been raised by other colleagues across the House during the committee discussion on this bill. I think it would be a good practice for the government to be taking notice and for there to be responses on some of the issues that have been raised tonight, because it might be an uncontroversial bill, but it does raise some significant issues that do need to be addressed around our treaty obligations, around how they're being met, around the costs, and around the wider strategy for New Zealand around future energy security and around growing our alternative sources of fuels. But as I said, and the concerns about our international reputation are valid. This government is, however, only prepared to act on protecting our reputation. I think it would have been very, it's a pity that there, as I said before, that there weren't more submissions on this bill. But there has been a good discussion tonight. I think that that there will be further discussion in the committee stages.
I call Brett Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure to rise and speak on this bill.